The last 8 weeks I vibe coded 2 full projects. A mobile game called SAAS, which is now in the App Store, and a SAAS for YouTubers called Framia to build AI thumbnails. But here's the cool part. You don't actually need to be a developer to build something like this. I have a computer science degree and I've written a lot of code over the past, 15 years. But honestly, for these builds, I barely touched the keyboard. I just planned everything with AI and let the tools do the heavy lifting. I did a lot of mistakes when I started vibe coding, and I wanted to share them with you so you don't make the same mistakes. So yeah, today I want to show you how you can build your own SAAS, even if you can't code, even if you are not a developer. I will show you what worked and where I nearly messed it up. Before you build anything, plan it. I opened ChatGPT and said, I want to build a thumbnail tool for YouTubers. What's the ideal setup? And it gave me pretty much everything. Feature list, backend plan, database schema, even some edge cases I hadn't thought about. And this is also a part where I have messed up before. With Astrodash, I skipped this step entirely. I had no plan, no clear goal, and honestly it was kind of a chaos. So for Framia, I started to sit down and plan everything ahead. I described to ChatGPT what I wanted to have. The core MVP basically. I described the core feature set I wanted to have. And then I broke it down into front-end, back-end, design, and even security. I used a response from ChatGPT and saved those as a file in my project. This is a pretty important step, especially when you start a new project, because it gives you, and more importantly, the AI, a common ground to work on. AI can sometimes go off the rails, and while that can occasionally lead to cool surprises, most of the time it just does random stuff that doesn't help. So basically plan your project before you start building it. One important thing when it comes to vibe coding is the limitation we have when it comes to tokens. Tools like Cursor, VS Code, and Windsurf all use tokens to communicate with the AI under the hood. For Framia and Astrodash, I used Cursor. It's an AI-powered code editor where you can write code like normal, but you can also just ask Claude to write code, explain stuff, fix bugs, refactor code, whatever you really need. But there's one important thing when it comes to Cursor and Claude. Every time you ask Cursor a question, it's sending the data to Claude in the background. And pretty much every plan on Cursor has a token limit, which means we want to be pretty effective when it comes to asking questions or writing code. Starting a new project always requires a lot of code, because you will pretty much always have the same features like a login flow, payments, accounts, dashboards, and you will spend a lot of tokens just to build something that has been solved like a million times. And yeah, I learned this the hard way. In Astrodash, I started without a boilerplate, without a plan. I just burned through my tokens in a couple of days. And now I had the option to either pay more money or use a model which is inferior to Claude. But for Framia, I used a boilerplate. A boilerplate is a code base pre-built with all the core functions we pretty much always need. Or what I also like to do, especially if I'm just playing around with some ideas, is to use tools like Lovable, Bolt, or V0. We can just type into the chat what we want to build, or even better, use the plan we have created in the previous step. All of these platforms have a very generous free plan, so we can use all of them just to figure out which one has the best front end and use that as our baseline. In this case, I think Lovable did a pretty good job. So we can just download the project and import it into Cursor. Now we got a pretty solid starting point, and even better, we saved a lot of tokens. Use what's already out there and let AI help you build on top of it. Don't start from scratch unless you really have to, and use the tools I mentioned to save tokens. When it comes to design, AI is not really bad, but it's also not really great. What I like to do is search for clean and modern UI. Platforms like Curated Design and Landing Gallery have pretty awesome examples. And when I found a layout I liked, I took a screenshot and dropped it into the chat of Cursor. And you can then just tell the AI to build this into your website. Depending on the complexity of the design, it will either do a pretty good job or go completely wrong. Dropping a design can help, but for Framia, for example, I went through every element one by one in the hero section. I really had to iterate quite often on each element you see here. And honestly, the more detail I gave, the better the UI turned out. So for the headline, I told the AI the exact fonts I wanted to use. And also for the animation, I exactly described what I wanted to have here. It took some time to get it right, but honestly, the result is pretty cool. And considering I didn't write a single line of code for this is also pretty amazing. And once I was happy with the hero section, I could just reference it in the chat to update all my other sections. Now I have a pretty coherent design layout throughout my entire landing page. And all I really had to do was to reference my hero section, reference, for example, the pricing section, and write something like, here's my hero section, use this as a reference to update the pricing section. Once we have our front end, we can start to host the project somewhere. Which brings me to today's sponsor, Cloudways. I use Cloudways and it honestly saved me a ton of time. It's fast, secure, and super scalable, which is quite important if you don't know if just 10 people are visiting your site or a few 100,000. What I really liked is the built-in auto-scaling feature. A very simple slider to choose the resources you need. I also made a comparison between Cloudways and my current provider. And it turns out that Cloudways is like 10 times faster than my current provider, which is kind of crazy. And you can easily plug in add-ons like Cloudflare, CDN, or malware protection with just a few clicks. Whether you are hacking together an MVP or going live for your first 1000 users, Cloudways keeps your app running smooth so you can focus on your product. You can find the link below if you want to give it a try for your own project. For the backend, I went with Firebase. I have used it for pretty much all of my projects in the past. It is super easy to use and has all the features we really need. So for example, in Premiere, I have used authentication, I used the database to store user information, and I use the storage function to host the thumbnails we create at Premiere. Firebase is pretty much doing all the heavy lifting when it comes to your backend. I really like to use Firebase as my backend because it lets me move really fast. With the custom server, I would have to think about infrastructure, how to set up the backend, etc. But with Firebase, I can just focus on building my product. Setting up Firebase takes a moment, but you can just ask ChatGPT or actually also just Cursor to guide you through the whole setup. Every time I kind of felt stuck, I just asked Cursor how to solve it. Even though AI is coding everything, I think it's still quite important to know how the entire product is working. So every time I felt stuck, I just asked in the chat to add more logs, to explain everything to me, and to guide me through the code to figure out what's the main problem. It was way easier for me to move forward once I understood what the problem was. And once the codebase gets bigger and bigger, it gets really hard for the AI to figure out certain bugs. If I don't know how the backend works, like in general, it's pretty hard to figure out what the issue is. When it comes to security, you don't really need to know everything, but there are two things you have to get right to have a solid baseline. I think this is the part where most non-tech people forget to pay attention to. But it's a pretty important thing when it comes to building something online. I have seen people ship entire projects with exposed API keys right in the front end. Put them in a .env file. And never put them in your front-end code. If someone finds your keys, they can just abuse them, and you'll be the one paying for it. Lock down your database. If you're using Firebase, that means setting up proper Firestore rules. By default, Firebase lets pretty much everyone read your entire database. And you really don't want that. That's pretty much it. There's a lot more, of course, to security, but these two steps will prevent like 90% of beginner mistakes. And a simple way to check your codebase is to give a prompt like, you're an experienced full-stack security engineer. I want you to review my codebase for common security issues, especially exposed API keys, open database, insecure API endpoints, missing input validations, or public files or routes that should be protected. Here's my backend, and let me know what looks risky and how to fix it. And that's pretty much it. It's not rocket science, and you can always ask in the chat if you are unsure or need any help. I vibe coded Premiere and Astrodash without really writing any code, and now they are real. I did a lot of mistakes when I started to vibe code, but I didn't give up and learned quite a lot along the way. Now I have a pretty good system to build new projects with AI. The entire process is way faster than it used to be. I think really the best part is that you can now build something that you have as an idea. And you no longer are gatekept by knowing how to code. You don't like your to-do app, just build your own. Or you have an idea you always wanted to see in real life, now you can do it. AI has kind of made it possible for everyone to build something. I've added a few prompts in the description below to kickstart your project. Oh, and by the way, if you are a content creator and want to give Frameyear a try, let me know. I'm still looking for a few beta testers. That's it from my side. See you in the next one. Bye.